this is MJ, and in today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make a fun and easy granny stitch dress. So I'm using this gorgeous color of Prism. It's sunset and it has these beautiful shades, but you can go to their website and they have a variety of different colors to choose from. I'm also going to be using Maxim wood hooks for this project. I'm using a 5mm as well as a 4.5mm. And all of these supplies are going to be listed in the description box, and they've all been provided to me from Maxim. This pattern is worked in 2 pieces flat, and we're working from the side to the center of the garment. So we're starting at the sleeve, working into the center, and we'll make 2 panels and then we'll seam them together. So now what I want to do with this dress is I want the sleeves to look very similar. So as you can see, you can start really however you want. Look at your balls of yarn to try to get 2 that are going to start around the same. So this one you can see we've started with the dark orange and it's moving into yellow and then orange to the brown to the pink to the purple. So looking at these balls, even though the ball I started with I pulled from the center, this ball from the outside is going to go in that similar pattern. So that is something to consider. You may need to play around, but try to look at your balls of yarn before you start so that you can choose to start with a ball that you're going to have another matching ball that you can work with, or you're going to have to pull off to make the colors line up. So now if you go to the blog or purchase the PDF, you can follow along for the size that you're working on. This sleeve will be different depending on the size, and you can always modify as well the sleeve width to your liking. So I'm going with an oversized sort of look with my sleeve, but if you wanted it to fit a little bit snugger, then just choose a smaller sleeve width, or if you want it bigger, choose a bigger sleeve width. It doesn't really matter how big your sleeve is. It's not going to affect the body section. So it's easy to alter the width by picking a different size. A pattern like this, it's always good maybe to have some extra yarn just so that you can color match it. Unless you're not concerned about the color pattern, then you could just work it really however you want. But if you're concerned and you want it to color match, always having some extra yarn on hand is a good idea. So we need to start out with a chain in multiples of 4. So I'm going to chain out 68, and I'm using the 4.5mm hook for this. So I have a total of 68. Now I'm going to work in the second chain from the hook, 1, 2. I'm going to turn my work and go into that back bump, and this is going to make the edge look much nicer than just going through the back loop of the chain. So just turn and get into that little back bump. And if your stitches are too tight, it's going to be really hard to do this. So you really need a nice even chain that's not too tight, not too loose. So you may have to practice that out because this is the edge of your sleeve. So you want it to look nice. If you're not happy, the finished piece isn't going to look as well. Now you could always, when you're finished, go back over this and single crochet across it just to give it a nice finished look. And I may decide to do that with mine as well. I'm gonna wait and see how it all looks, because it is really easy when you work in the back bump to then join. It looks like a stitch on the side, so you can always finish off the edge, but try to have a nice clean edge to start with, and it will make that edge of the sleeve look nice. Okay, so I'm going to continue working single crochets across, and you'll have a total then of 67 stitches. Okay, so now once you have worked across and you're happy with that foundation row, we're going to change over to the larger hook, which is our 5mm. Going to chain 3, turn. So our chain 3 is going to count as a double crochet. So we're going to double crochet into the next stitch. So right here counts, this counts as one double. We're going into the next stitch and working a double and a double in the next stitch. Chain 1. We're going to skip the next stitch, work a double crochet in the next 3. Chain 1. I'm not sure, did I chain 1? So our repeat is going to be chain 1. We're going to skip the next stitch, double crochet in the next 3. So chain 1, skip the next stitch, double crochet in the next 3. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that across. Okay, so you should be ending with 4 stitches. So we're going to chain 1, skip a stitch, work 3 doubles across the last 3. Okay, so it's going to look like this. So now we're going to get into our pattern. So we're going to start out with a chain 4. We're going to skip the first 3 doubles, and in the chain 1 space, we're going to do a cluster, which will be 3 double crochets. Chain 1. In the next chain 1 space, cluster in the next chain 1 space, which is 3 double crochets, chain 1, 3 double crochets, chain 1. So work that across. Okay, so I'm almost across. I have done my cluster and my chain 1. I'm going to chain 1, and then you're going to put a double crochet between the second double and that chain 3. So work a double crochet. Now we're going to chain 3 and turn. And in our first chain 1 space right here, we are going to do 2 double crochet. So our chain 3 plus our 2 doubles equal a cluster, chain 1. Then we'll cluster chain 1 in every chain 1 space across. Chain 1, cluster, chain 1. So the pattern is going to be a repeat of a row starting with the chain 4 and then a row starting with the cluster, but I'll work all the way across and meet you up at the end. So once you get to the end, I've already chained 1, and in our last space here, so this would be the chain 4 counts as a double crochet in a chain 1. So it would be that chain 1 space, we're adding our final cluster. and then we'll chain 4, turn, and we're back to repeating this row. So you're going to just repeat a row starting with the chain 4 and starting with the cluster as you work through the pattern. And you can also alter the length of the sleeve, so you're going to work as many rows as you would like for your sleeve length, and I will give you the number of rows that I have done for the one that I'm working on. And this is also the right side of your work, and it's always a good idea just to mark it just so you stay on track, because I know that can get confusing. So the foundation row, right side, the first row of granny stitch is the wrong side, wrong side, and we're on the right side currently. So I just like to add that marker, and that just helps keep me on track. So for my sleeve, I'm working a total of 36 cluster rows. So follow along with the pattern. So I'm working up a total of 36 rows for my sleeve. Okay, so I've been working away on my sleeve section, and I worked a total of 36 rows, and I've ended with a double crochet. Then I'm going to turn my work. So I'm now actually on the wrong side of my work. So I finished on my right side. Now what we're going to do with a separate ball of yarn, or if you have, I've got some scraps here, try to join maybe a similar color if possible. What we're going to do now is basically create a section that's going to come off for the front and the back, okay? Because we're working from the side across. So if you're looking at it, this is the sleeve, and then we need to have the front and the back coming off this section. So what we're going to do is join on and chain out for the length that we need. Now this is where you can alter the length if you want to make the dress longer, or if you want to make the dress shorter. This is where you're going to do it. Now our pattern is worked in multiples of 4 because we have our cluster, which is 3, and our chain 1. So I have decided I want an additional 30 clusters. So I'm going to add 120 chains over to this side. So I'm going to just join into, I'm going to put a slip knot on my hook, and I'm going to join in. So up at the left hand side here in that turning chain, I'm going to slip stitch, get this joined in, and then I'm going to chain out 120, which will give me 30 clusters. So if you want fewer clusters, remember, use a multiple of 4. If you're lengthening it or shortening it, you want to go in that multiple of 4. Once I have 120, I am just going to fasten that off. Okay, and now it's set up to work across it, so I don't have to worry about that side now. I'm going to come back over to my working yarn, which is over here. On this side, what I'm going to do is chain out 121. So I'm just going to do one extra chain, and it's just going to make it easier to start working back across. Okay, so I've worked out 121. So now what I'm going to do is use that chain 1 just as a little turning chain, and I'm going to get right into working my 3 double crochet. I'm going to do my cluster as working out a double, a double, a double, because I don't want a big chain space. So we're going to do it that way, sort of how we started at the very beginning by working the 3 double, chain 1, skip 1. So that's how we'll work across the chain. So I'm going to yarn over. In the second chain from the hook, I'm going to do a double crochet in the next, and a double crochet in the next. Chain 1. Now we'll skip the next chain and work a double crochet in the next 3 chains. 1, 2, 3, chain 1, and we're going to skip the next chain, double crochet in the next 3. Okay, so we're going to do this all the way across our chain. So I'm going to work it across, and then I'll meet you when I get closer to the sleeve section. Okay, so I'm ending with 1 chain, and now I'm going to chain 1, and then I'm going to do a cluster in the first chain 1 space of the sleeve section. So we're going to work a cluster, chain 1, and work back across. Now we're going across the sleeve in our pattern. So now we'll be working the fronts, the back, and the sleeve all as one piece. So I'm going to work across the sleeve, and then I'm going to meet you up here, and then we'll work across this chain. Okay, so I've worked all the way across, so now we need to do our cluster in the last space. And then we'll get working across that chain. Basically like we did the other side, it's just the reverse. So we're chaining 1, we're going to skip the first chain that we made, and then in the next, so it's right there, it's kind of small to see, but then we're going to work a double crochet in the next 3 chains. Chain 1, we'll skip the next chain and then work a double crochet in the next 3. So we're going to work that all the way across the chain. Okay, so doing the 3 double crochets, chain 1, skip a chain, and work that all the way across. So you should have, we have 30 clusters here, or groups of 3 double crochet, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 16, 17. So we have 30 and 30, which is 60, plus 17. So we have a total for this row of 77 clusters. Now when we come back across the other row, when we end with the double, start with the chain 4, we'll only have 76. So we'll have 1 less. So it alternates our rows, and we'll end up just back into the stitch pattern, the same as what we were working for the sleeve. Okay, so I worked all the way across, and you should be ending with that 3 double crochet. So now we're going to chain 4. And we're going to jump right into our cluster pattern. So we're in the chain 1 space, we're going to work 3 double crochet, chain 1. In the next chain 1 space, 3 double crochet, chain 1. And we're now going to work that all the way across. Okay, so I'm coming to the end. We're going to do a double crochet between our double and the starting double. We're going to chain 3, turn, and now this row will begin with the cluster, so we're going to do 2 double crochet in that first chain 1 space. Then you're going to work a chain 1, cluster chain 1 in every chain 1 space across. So cluster chain 1. We're going to work that all the way across the entire length, and you're going to finish off with your cluster in that turning chain right here. So you're going to continue then working back and forth in rows, so repeating this row and this row. So the row that starts with the chain 4 and ends with a double, and then the row that starts with a cluster and ends with a cluster. So you're going to need to work as many rows as needed for the size that you're working on. So check your pattern and work the required number of rows for the size. Okay, so I have worked a total for this size of 17 rows, and you want to make sure that you are ending on a cluster row. Again, follow along with your pattern for the size you're working on. So next we're going to make a granny square. It's just a simple traditional style granny square that will be having run down the front and the back of the dress. So we're going to start with a magic ring. Wrap around your index finger 3 times. Take your hook, sliding it through, pull through, and chain 3. So our chain 3 is going to count as a double crochet. Work 2 double crochet, chain 1, so we've made our first cluster, 3 double crochet, chain 1, 3 double crochet, chain 1, and 3 double crochet. Chain 1. So now we're going to pull our ring tight. So I just like to move my work out of the way so I can see these loops really well. Take your tail, pull, and see how this loop pulls in, this one doesn't. Just take the loop that's pulled, and it's going to tug that other loop tight, and then you're going to tug your tail. Now I'm going to slip stitch across to my chain 1 space. So I'm going to go through the first double crochet, slip stitch 1, next double crochet, slip stitch 2, and slip stitch to the chain 1 space. So 3 slip stitches. So now for round 2, we'll be working 2 clusters per chain 1 space. So chain 3, work 2 double crochet. So our first cluster is made, chain 1, and in the same space, we'll do another cluster. Chain 1. Then we'll go to the next chain 1 space and we'll work a cluster, chain 1, and a cluster. Chain 1, and we'll do that in the next 2 chain 1 spaces, and then I'll meet you up again. So we'll chain 1, slip stitch across to the chain 1 space. So slip stitch in the first double, in the second double and in the chain 1, chain 3, work 2 double crochet, our first cluster, and you can see these are our corners. So our corners will always have our cluster, chain 1 cluster, and then the chain 1 spaces between the corners will just be 1 cluster to make our square. So let's go ahead and do 1 corner. So I've chained 1 and we'll do 3 doubles for the next cluster. Chain 1. We'll now do 1 cluster in the chain 1 space. Chain 1, and then we'll make another corner. So a cluster, chain 1, and a cluster. Chain 1 and a cluster in the chain 1 space. So I'm going to continue working this round just like this. Another corner, cluster, and I'll meet you over at the joint. Okay, so I've already chained 1. We're going to slip stitch across to the next corner. 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to continue so that we have a total of 5 rounds. And it's basically repetitive. The only difference is each round you'll have more clusters between your corners. So we had 1 cluster between the corners. This round we'll have 2 clusters between the corners. The next round we'll have 3 clusters between the corners. So it's just repetitive at this point. We start with a chain 3. We start at our corner, chain 1 cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1, and a corner. Cluster, chain 1, cluster. Chain 1. So I'm going to go ahead and work. I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to need to do an additional round so that I have a total of 5 rounds. I'll get that done and then I'll meet you back up. Okay, so I've worked all the way around. I've chained 1. We're going to slip stitch across to our corner. And then I'm going to fasten off, but I want to leave a little bit more than 3 times. Okay, so just make sure you have lots. I just like to go back and forth 3 times like this. Obviously a little bit more than that. It's better to have a little bit of extra than not enough, and then you can just fasten that off. Now, what I suggest doing is getting all of your squares made, and then you can mix and match how you put the colors together. I mean, you could go in sort of a gradient look if you wanted, like this, sort of however you want, but I would get them made so you can decide how you want your squares to look. And then I'm going to show you how you're going to join them. So what we want to do is we want to get them all joined across here. And then what we'll need to do is join them to the sides of the dress. So let's take these 2 squares. I'm going to leave this tail up to the top right corner. So taking our tails that we're going to seam. Now these, you could get rid of these tails. I like to, we've already crocheted over them one way. You can always just scooch back in the opposite direction This is going to be a nice secure tail just because we've crocheted over it to start with. So you're not going to need a lot of weaving on that. But if you want to get those out of the way, you can just do that quickly. I'm leaving, you could block your squares before joining them. I'm going to leave all of my blocking to the very end. Once we have it all assembled, then I'm going to lay it out and block it. Okay, so now we have that. We have our tails to the right top corners. Now I'm going to fold my square right side facing, and I'm going to use the tail that I have here in order to do this. So I'm just going to pull through and get a chain just so my hook's on this and I'm ready to go. So what I suggest is slip stitching it now together, and I'm going to go through my chain one corner over to this chain one corner, and I'm going to slip stitch. Make sure you do them a little bit loose. You don't want them too tight. And then I'm going to go through, if you look here, we can see these loops. I'm going to go through the front loop. We're going to call it the front loop, or the first loop we see. And then I'm going to go through the back loop. So not the front loop of this one, the back loop of this one. And then we're going to slip stitch. So we need to do 1, 2, and because this one had a slip stitch across, sometimes they'll be a little fiddly. Okay, and then we come to the chain one space. We're going to slip stitch through that. Okay, and then front loop, back loop. Front loop, back loop. Should be pretty easy. The other loops are going to want to go down to the center. And using the tail, it's just going to save some weaving, which we like. And I just don't want to slip stitch too tight because I don't want it to distort sort of our shape of our square, pulling in this section too tight. So I'm just going to finish. I've gone quite a bit, but I'm just going to finish going up. I am running short on this one, and I'm thinking I'll make sure I have a note on the video. Go with 4 times the amount, because as you can see, I just ran a little bit shy, which is not good. I have enough just to, I think, slip stitch through to finish it off and fasten it, but I just have that little tiny tail left. So go with about 4 times, and then you should have enough that you have more tail to weave. And then this is what it's going to look like. Okay, and like I say, you don't want to slip stitch too tight. This is coming out nicely. So what I'll do with this tail is just give it a knot, since I ran out of tail for weaving, and then I will weave that tail in. Okay, so then you would take your next square and you would do the same. So you would line this up, you would go right sides facing, and then you would have these ones attached just like this. So we would go do the exact same thing and then bring in the next one, and we would be able to use this tail and so on. So once you have them all seamed together, we then can seam it to the side of the dress. So I have my right sides facing. I'm gonna put a slip knot on the hook. I'm gonna go down to our corner. So the corner here, and I'm just gonna be going into the chain on this side. You can use whatever color you want to do this. Now I'm going to start into slip stitching. So I'm going to go through that front loop like I already showed you, and the back loop. Once you get going, it's going to be a bit easier here. Front loop over to the back loop, and then through the chain 1 spaces. So everything's going to line up exactly how you want it, your clusters, and then chain 1 spaces going through each side and slip stitching. Okay, so I'm going to work all the way getting the entire section of granny squares attached. Okay, so I'm coming up to the end. I'm going to go through that chain 1 space over to this chain 1 space, slip stitch. And when you finish off with a slip stitch, if you just pull through, it's going to help secure it a little bit more. And then you can weave in that tail. You'll need to weave in the starting tail as well. And you can see how that looks. So the main place you're going to see that color that you use is for all the slip stitches. You can see that there. So now what we need to do is join on the other side. Make sure you have your right sides out so you can join it correctly. So then what I'll do is I'll flip so that I have my right sides facing right here. Okay, so then I'm going to join this side. I'm going to basically do the exact same thing. I'm going to take my yarn, put a slip knot on my hook, and start down in the corner. So I'll go through the chain on this side over to the corner of the granny square. Slip stitch that in. Let's get this turned. So when you're going through that first one, you do have to go through the back loop of that chain just to get it. Once you get it started, it's going to be a lot easier. Okay, and then you can do the front loop and the back loop on this side. It's just getting it going. Is the tricky part. So then you go to the chain 1 on that side, and slip stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and join all of this, and then I need to do the same thing for this side. Okay, so I'm finishing up with this one. Go into the corner, and I'll chain 1 there to fasten it off. So this is what the front is looking like now. Okay, so now we need to put the back together. Okay, so for the back, you want to make sure that everything is lined up. So right side, this is the right side. So then when we seam it, we need to have the right sides facing. Okay, so then we're going to seam. And I did leave a long tail, but I'm wondering if it's easier so that you don't have to guess the amount just to join on. But I did leave a tail here, so I'm going to continue just to use it and seam up the side. Okay, so now we have the front and the back. So it's all one piece at this point, and now we just need to seam the sides. And you could leave some of them open. You don't have to seam the entire length down. That's sort of a personal preference. You could block it at this point just so everything gets smoothed out. So you can look at the schematics and block it out to measurements. So the seaming method that I'm using is the mattress seam, and it just is going to help hide the color of yarn, especially when we're working through a bunch of different colors. So all I'm doing is taking my yarn needle, I'm going through the side. I started with orange just because I wanted it to match when I joined on down here. I have a long tail, so it's a little bit tedious to pull through. So you come through that side, then we come back over to this side, just pushing your needle up through that side stitch. Come back over, do the same thing again on this side. And then when you pull it, it's just going to pull it in. I kind of messed that one up a little bit. And also try and pay attention to lining up your rows as well. I was getting a little bit off track there. Keep each row lined up as well. Okay, so this is a little bit tedious to work through to seam it, but it's going to give a nice finished look. That will be worth it. And I did the really long tail because I didn't want to have to join any more yarn back on. Okay, and I'm just going to keep working that and do both sides of the dress. So what I found going up the side, and even for the sleeve as well, for the sleeve, I found it was good to match up the rows that had, let me show you. So for the sleeve, to make sure I was on track, I would go through the cluster rows on each side, and then you're going to have the double crochet or chain rows. So make sure you are lining each of them up as you go. So as you can see, I've gone down all the side and how nicely it blends in. You can only, the odd time, see a little peak of the orange. And I just am matching up clusters as I go down. And how I'm going through these ones, I'm just hiding the yarn through that cluster, pull my yarn through, go over to the other side, and get this cluster as well. So I know I've matched up those clusters together. And you can pull through. And then our final one here. Through this one as well. Now you could leave a slit if your dress is longer. I'm going to leave this here for now just in case I decide to make any changes. And make sure you give it a tug that it is all laying. That it's not, when you've pulled your yarn, it hasn't pulled it through. So you can see how nice the join is going to be on that. So I'm going to go and do the other side as well. Okay, so what you can do to finish off your dress is you can add some edging. Now it would look okay if you left it just like this, but if you want to give it a little bit more of a finished look, we can add some edging around. I'm going to go with the 4.5 millimeter crochet hook. And I've chosen this shade of the color. You can kind of go with whatever you feel like you prefer in the range of colors. And I'm going to go over to the corner of the granny square here. Now, both sides of the dress are the same, so you can decide at this point what you would like the back to be and what you'd like the front. I'm going to go with the yellow as my front. So with a slip knot on the hook, we're going to go into our corner, the slip stitch, chain 1, and then we're going to work a yarn over slip stitch. So go through the stitch and then you pull through 2 loops. So yarn over, go through the stitch, pull through, and when you get to the chain 1, do the same. Just want to make sure that your stitches aren't too tight. Now when you get to this section, you're going to continue just working around. So 1 and then 1 in each stitch as well. So you're just going to work this all the way around your neck. So now once you get all the way around, I am going to slip stitch in the first slip stitch to join, chain 1, and now what we're going to do is I'm going to work another round. This is going to be a little bit different. If you take a look, you can see your nice clean stitch edge. I don't want to work into that because I want to see this nice beautiful stitch. So what I'm going to do is turn my work and see how there's a little loop back here. We're going to call this the 3rd loop, and this is what we'll be working into. So I'm still going to do the yarn over slip stitch, but instead of working through the stitch, we're going to come back and work through that loop. And as we go a little bit, I will show you how nice this is going to look. I'll just get going a little ways. So what you're going to see is you're going to see the nice stitch of this and the nice stitch here. So it's going to make a really beautiful edge all the way around the neck, really giving it a nice finished look. So once you get all the way around, we can slip stitch to join. Okay, and just fasten that off and weave in your tail. So I really like how this gives a nice finished edge. Now you could do this also for the bottom of the dress. So you can go across and do the same thing. The only difference is you'll work through stitches on the granny, but when you work across here, I would do 2 slip stitches per row. So 2 slip stitches for this row and 2 for this row as you work that across, so it's nice and even. Now I kind of like the idea of this raw edge here for the bottom of mine, and this one is my bit longer version, so I'm not going to add the edging to it, but I want to make sure that you do know you have that option, and it will give this nice edging just like this to the bottom and give it more of a finished look. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and tap the bell to stay updated on all my new videos and tutorials. Make sure to check the description box below this video for all the links. Thanks so much, guys. Have an awesome day.